Knowledge is a competitive advantage. I've said it once, I'm probably going to say it a million more times, and so I'm coming at you today with some more book recommendations. And we're going to talk about training books today. Books that are actually going to help you understand how to structure your training, what all those weird running terms actually mean that we use in our training plans. And if you wanted to actually build your own training plan and really understand why it looks the way that it does and some of the big reasons why it's structured a certain way, why you do certain workouts for some races and not for others, these book recommendations are for you. So my first book, Daniel's Running Formula. You knew this book was going to be in this list, right, guys? This is like the OG training book, old school. I know this is an older copy of the book. I think there's now at least a third edition out. And I really like Daniel's Running Formula. It's probably the first training book that I really got, that I poured over when it talks about different types of workouts and periodization. And I really like it. I think 70 to 80% of this book is gold. The other 20 to 30%, I think it needs a little bit more explanation. For example, the section on cadence. You know, Jack Daniels is kind of famous for popularizing the 180 steps per minute cadence as this gold standard that runners should try to hit. But there's a little bit more nuance to that, and we're not all elite runners. So I think there should be a little bit more discussion about some of those things. Some of the issues and topics are dated or not super relevant, I think, to how most of us think about training. But nevertheless, I am complaining about very, very small issues in Daniel's Running Formula. I really like this book. If you're someone who wants a classic running book that really goes into detail on all aspects of training, then Daniel's Running Formula is for you. All right, so Daniel's Running Formula is what I consider one of the more classic training books about running. Now, there's a couple other training books that I really like that look at training from a unique perspective. And so the first one we're going to look at is Matt Fitzgerald's Brain Training. I really like this book because it talks about all these issues from the perspective of the brain, the mind. So it's really through that prism. And so everything from, strength training to your stride to injury prevention, a lot of these topics are going to be in any training book, but Matt does a great job at talking about these books in a certain way so that you understand them more through the lens of your psychology. Really like this book, especially because he includes a whole bunch of training plans that I love. And I would say half the book, this is a very thick book, and I'm still in training plans. Yeah, about half the book, if not a little bit more, all training plans. I love Brain Training because of that perspective, because he looks at it through that mind-body perspective. Because look, you can't separate the mind from the body. And I think for too long, runners have ignored the role of the mind in our training, in our ability to stay consistent, in the way that we think about running, and in the way that we don't push ourselves to the point of injury. So, love this book by Matt Fitzgerald, my brother from another mother, as we like to say. I would pick up this book if you're into sports psychology stuff, but you're also really interested in learning about training and the role of the brain in the training process. Our next general training book is from the perspective of science. Science of Running by Steve Magnus. This book is almost like a textbook, and this is one that I have not read cover to cover. I really use it as a textbook and refer back to certain topics within the book. Extremely, extremely well cited, lots of studies, and if you're a science-oriented person who really wants to go down the rabbit hole of understanding what the science says about everything from periodization to strength training to developing economical running form, this book is for you. Really like this book. And Steve is not just a coach, but he's an exercise scientist. And so this is a perspective on training that I think is really good. And I think Steve has talked in the past about how coaching is part art and part science. And this is the science side of things. So it's huge. This book is absolutely enormous. And I just love how everything is cited. So there's some really good evidence here for all that Steve has to say. And Steve is also someone who has talked in the past about the fallacy of zone training and a bunch of other things that I've also talked about, and I sometimes lean on him for some of the more science-oriented topics within the running industry. So Steve is a great person to learn from, and I really recommend his book, The Science of Running. All right, so we've had our classic training book. We've had our training book through the prism of your mindset, and we've had a training book that is really centered on the science behind training for runners. Now let's look at some more event-specific training books. Explosive Running by Michael Yessis is one of the first books that I ever got. Obviously, as I think a 19, 20-year-old kid, I really wanted to be an explosive runner, so I think this really spoke to me. But I would say that this book is really great for the middle distance athlete. If you're someone focusing on the 10K and shorter, this is a really great book to understand some of the extras that go into the training that really make you a more explosive runner. Everything from dynamic flexibility work to strength training to drills, plyometrics. There's lots of stuff about running form in this book that I really like. And it's a little bit short on some of the science-oriented training theories. You know, why are we structuring a training plan in a certain way? Instead, he really drills down on some more speed and explosive aspects of training. But there's a lot of pictures in this book, which I really like. And while they are they are old and very funny, they're still really excellent. The content is rock solid. So I really like this book for ideas for drills and strength exercises, and then how to build them into the training plan. Because you can't just add them in willy-nilly, you have to have a plan. This book is really great for that. Our next event-specific book recommendation is for the more long-distance runners out there, specifically the marathoners, Advanced Marathoning by Pete Fitzinger. This is probably one of the best marathon training books that you can buy. I have the 3rd edition here, and I've really studied the training plans and read about half of the content in the book. And this is for the more advanced runner, obviously. The thing that I really like about this book is that they have chapters based on how much mileage you run as a runner. So if you're someone who trains for the marathon running up to 55 miles per week, there's a whole chapter for you. If you're someone who runs 55 to 70 miles per week, 70 to 85, or more than 85 miles per week, then there are separate chapters for those mileage levels. And I think that does a really great job of explaining how to tackle training when your training is very much dependent on how much you're able to run. You can imagine someone who's only running 15 or 20 miles a week. They can't do a lot of these more advanced workouts. So a lot is dependent on the volume. And the volume really does give you the strength for some of those more advanced, longer workouts. So this book, again, is for the more advanced, longer distance runner. It is science heavy. There's a lot of jargon and technical aspects to it. But for the person who's really interested in learning the nuts and bolts of training, specifically for the marathon, then Advanced Marathoning is one of the best books you can buy. And I've saved my best for last. I wanted to save my favorite training book of all time. And part of this is just my personal opinion on which book really spoke to me, but that is Run Faster by Brad Hudson and Matt Fitzgerald. Brad Hudson used to coach Dathan Ritzenhein. He coached a lot of other national and world-class caliber runners. And he has a very, I wouldn't say unique perspective on training, but he has a very strong perspective on training. And so he doesn't pull any punches with telling you what he thinks works and what he thinks does not work. And the reason why I like Run Faster so much is that it's comprehensive. It doesn't matter if you're training for the 5K or the marathon, this book is just absolute gold. And he goes into so many other aspects of training that I think are incredibly valuable. And he's also not one of these coaches that is going to have you do a bunch of stuff that doesn't really matter. And that's both good and bad. And what I mean by that is that he doesn't really talk about strength training or injury prevention too much in this book. And those are two things that I talk a lot about because I think they're so incredibly valuable for runners. So I do think there are a couple holes in Run Faster, but nevertheless, the running portion of this book, which is really what it's all about, is one of the best. It's my personal favorite. And if you wanted to buy one book to get a very good overview of how to train distance runners, Run Faster is it. I also have a link under this video for our Runner's Library page on the Strength Running website. This is where I have a lot more running book suggestions built out by category. So if you're interested in a book for weight loss or a training book or maybe a book that will just get you inspired and motivated to run, we have all of those details for you. So definitely check that out. And I want to hear from you because I know I haven't read every single running book out there. What book are you reading right now about running, and what would you recommend to me for training?